To my dearest wife, I write to you in hopes that my written word will properly express the melancholic deprivation that this metal world has afforded me. It's been over 100 days of my solo non-stop colonization of this distant planet, and I'm beginning to feel the sting of loneliness. I must concede that my original hopes of living in a peaceful commune with the inhabitants and working together to flourish into one great society has become but a distant memory, one tarnished by the ever-waking realization that I, myself, have killed all the inhabitants of this world. What few living creatures are left have no desire to communicate with me, and I am left to wander my metal roads, maintain my metal buildings, and gather my metal resources, in hopes that one day I shall be reunited with the sweet sound of your voice. But alas, you may very well not mourn for me, for my objective all along was to colonize this planet. I have in fact fulfilled my purpose, and for the people of Earth I would gladly do this again and again. I only ask of you one thing. Please, send pics. This game actually has a story, but I think mine is better. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a casual review, a series where I test and review games so you can decide if you want to try them out. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the Riftbreaker, a base-building isometric ARPG that has taken up hours of my life and given me old RTS vibes that I really didn't know I had missed until now. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know how popular this game is. There are a few YouTube videos covering it, and of course IGN reviewed it, but I haven't really heard any talk about it before. I only picked it up because Steam recommended it to me after playing V Rising, Path of Exile, and all my other ARPGs. I found out after I started writing this script that the publishers were actually sponsoring content creators to cover the release of some new DLC that dropped. But hey, I'm not a real YouTuber, so this video is not sponsored and the devs get a freebie. But I'm so glad it was recommended to me. It's been a long time since I've lost myself in a game. I mean, really lost myself. When I played the Riftbreaker, I had no concept of time. Every time I'd load this game up, it was a multiple-hour gaming session late into the night, where I would eventually look up at the time and realize that I'd been playing for twice as long as I'd thought. The Riftbreaker is an ARPG that basically pulls in elements from classic base building and RTS-style games and mixes it with elements from bullet hell games. You control a heroine named Ashley who is sent to this new planet to start the process of resource gathering and colonization. In order to withstand the harsh environment, Ashley wears a mecha suit loaded with an AI companion named Mr. Briggs. The premise of the game is that you need to build a base of operations and establish the technology on the planet to bring resources back to Earth. Meanwhile, the planet is trying its best to kill you in every way possible. Hostile creatures, environmental hazards, incredibly fast-spawning flora and fauna, most things are working against you. And that's basically it for a story. Don't expect me to go in much detail about any enthralling storyline here. The dialogue and quest objectives are just a vehicle to get you engaged with gameplay, but the gameplay is damn worth it. While you build up your base and collect resources from the planet, you must also build up your defenses through AI towers and upgrades for your mecha suit. Not having these defenses will be fatal for you and your mission. These monsters are not messing around, they will take advantage of any and all weaknesses. If you feel like your base is protected enough, you can go out to explore the wilds. You may run into these pods which allow you to extract resources and sometimes weapon upgrades at the cost of attracting a horde of enemies. This means that exploration is encouraged, and there are small encounters to be found all over the map. While all of this is happening, there are a couple of different events that will occur randomly, like hive invasions, earthquakes, meteors. These affect you and your base in different ways. Like, for example, if the weather brings in fog, you won't be able to use your solar panels, which means that having a variety of energy sources is incredibly important. After you build up your base to accommodate certain buildings, you unlock the orbital scanner, which allows you to travel to other parts of the planet to take on missions and gather rare resources that you can't find in your current location. These are required to complete the story, as these resources are necessary to build the final mission's building. But these are really just missions to get you to complete the same satisfying base building and combat gameplay, with different factors affecting how you achieve your goals. But before I get into the simple and enjoyable gameplay loop, let's dive into the details of some of the systems. These systems are complex enough that it requires you to pay attention, but it's so easily explained that it's incredibly inviting to engage with. For example, the base building is probably the most polished part of the game. You start off with a few different buildings, but over time you can research the blueprints for more than you may ever need. This invites you to come up with your own strategy on how to build your base and how to survive with the different resources and enemies around you, like with the abundance of different energy sources. You start with the basics: solar, wind, mineral power plants. These allow you to build your first base and maintain a consistent flow with small amounts of energy. But as you progress in your research tree, you uncover more complex buildings and upgrade your basic ones. These require more power. So you have two options: either fill your entire base with more solar panels and wind turbines, or research more efficient energy sources like plant and animal biomass facilities that'll give you a bunch of energy as long as you keep providing them fuel. This also comes into play when you get to locations that have poor wind quality or less sun, which will heavily affect your energy output. Even further down the line, the only energy source you may be able to reliably use is lava, so you definitely want to research all of these power sources. Best case scenario is to have a mix of all power sources, so no matter what problems may come, you'll be prepared. And that's just one part of base building. You can build defenses like walls and sentry towers. You can build different resource buildings so your base can be self-sufficient while you're off clearing the land of its hostile inhabitants. You can build an armory that lets you create and upgrade different weapons and mods for your mecha suit. I think the most impressive part about this is that the Riftbreaker has introduced an intuitive base building system into the game that allows you to spend more time to learn the other two complementary parts of the game. First is the combat. Combat isn't just swing or shoot with your mecha suit. Combat is an entire system on its own that is necessary to master or you will die. This is not a terribly difficult game, but I played on normal difficulty and there were plenty of times where hordes of enemies would surround me and I had no response. Luckily, there isn't really a death penalty, at least in normal, so I can just respawn at my base. There are plenty of different weapons, each with their own damage type and style of play. For example, I really liked using the flamethrower in my left hand and the machine gun in my right hand. Using these together would absolutely obliterate any hordes of small enemies that came at me. I also like to punch things with these fist weapons, but these rock guys were resistant to physical damage and the flamethrower did almost no damage to them. So when these big bad guys were blowing up my base, I had to bring out my rocket launcher to blow them up with high-octane explosive damage. So each weapon has a damage type and each enemy has resistances and weaknesses. Enemies also have their different combat styles. Some are ranged, some are small and fast, some are big but do lots of damage. There isn't an extreme variety of enemies, and a lot of them are reused, just made more powerful using different colors, but it really didn't matter to me, as long as the combat was fun. Equipment for your mech suit consists of your weapon loadout, 3 to each arm, your suit mods which affect your health, ammo, movement speed, and other stats, and your movement ability, which is basically a dash or a jump. Each weapon can also be modded as long as it has mod slots, which are unlocked when you research higher quality weapons. These mods will affect things like your crit chance or your weapon range. Some give an additional damage over time modifier, make your bullets bounce off terrain. But most importantly, to progress in base building and combat, you will need to research everything. This is the system that pads out the game time a bit. As you progress through the campaign or as you collect more resources, you unlock more and more blueprints to research using this research tree. There's actually 3 of them, one for your base building, one for combat in your mech suit, and one for alien technology. I know it looks a bit daunting, but I think the game does an incredible job of slowly introducing you to different parts of the tree and giving you nudges along the way to keep up with your research. It's also a necessity since progressing in the game relies on upgrading all your technology and staying alive in combat. The only problem that I really have with researching is that everything is time-based. There are no resource requirements to research anything, it's all based on wait time and campaign progress. So every time you need something to progress, you need to wait like 3 to 5 minutes, give or take, until you can build whatever building or upgrade whatever equipment you need to complete the mission. Researching one at a time is not the end of the world, and thankfully the campaign doesn't really require you to research everything, but I will say that with everything that this research tree offers, there may be things you don't need, but there are plenty of things that you may want. And for me personally, I wanted to upgrade everything. Upgrading buildings meant better defenses and more efficient resource farmers. Upgrading weapons meant I could survive tougher combat encounters. So I had to wait a long time to research everything. I basically had the research queue filled to the max, so while I was off completing other tasks, the research time would be passing in the background. Like I said, not an entirely negative thing, but just like with every other base building game, there are a lot of times where you just take an action and wait. Select a building, wait for its construction. Need more resources? Wait for your gatherers to get more. I will say that the crafting is immediate, so that's a huge plus. If you research a weapon, you can just craft it immediately. Assuming you have the resources, you don't have to wait for it to be crafted over time. Again, I have to mention that I'm talking about minute-long waits here. Nothing is beyond 10 minutes, even the most powerful upgrades or buildings, but I just want to call it out since that is a major characteristic of base building games. And that's it. That's really the entire game. You start off with nothing on a remote planet and steal all the resources around you to build your colony and drive off any living creatures in the area that may want to eat you. The Riftbreaker is very simple, and that's hard to do for a game that mashes together 2 very different genres. The base building is clean and easy to understand, and the bullet hell combat is fun, impactful, and a complete joy. I spent way too much time in this game just playing around with the base building and hunting random enemies. The campaign is pretty short, but the most fun is just messing around and treating the game as your personal sandbox. But before I get into my own experience, let's talk about the couple critiques I have. My critiques don't touch the gameplay at all. They all have to do with stuff that surrounds the gameplay, like the story. The story is pretty generic and you don't really have much of an actual storyline beyond, hey, I'm Ashley, my mech's name is Mr. Briggs and he's an AI that helps me survive and colonize other planets, so let's build shit and stay alive and make our superiors back on Earth happy. That's pretty much it. At the very beginning of the whole experience, there's some dialogue between Ashley and Mr. Briggs that gives you some background information on Ashley and why she's there, but it's dropped pretty quickly and you don't get any other character development after that. This makes me feel like the dev team was going to try and make her a character, but got caught up in more important parts of the game. Like at one point Ashley says that this isn't the first time she's been on a colonization mission. She went on a prior mission to a different planet and lost her arm trying to study a foreign organism. She then had that arm replaced with a mechanical one, and Mr. Briggs responds by saying he won't let that happen to her. At another point, Mr. Briggs mentions, while we're crafting weapons and building base defenses, that we should be aware of our surroundings and make sure that we have enough firepower to kill any hostile inhabitants. Ashley responds by saying that our motive is not to colonize by force, but to preserve as much of the environment as possible so as not to disrupt the ecosystem for any friendly inhabitants. Mr. Briggs doesn't necessarily disagree, but he repeats that his prime objective is to colonize at any cost. This is character development, and I wish that the game had more of it. Like I said, it kinda got dropped about a third of the way into the game. I'm pretty sure this is because it would be hard to build such an open sandbox style game with a heavy emphasis on a narrative. But still, I'm sure we could have had a bit more character development just by using the interactions between Mr. Briggs and Ashley. It doesn't have to be a crazy narrative-driven storyline, but even sandbox games have character development. Any game that wants its characters to be relatable or believable will have at least a bit of character development. I mean, it took me until this part of the script to even realize that the mech's name is Mr. Riggs and not Mr. Briggs. Like I've been saying this entire time. That's how non-memorable these characters are. The other problem I have with the game is its UI design. There isn't much I can think of off the top of my head to get around this, but because there are so many systems and information and items to craft, the UI gets a bit cluttered. You get this feeling when going from researching to crafting to the orbital scanner to the equipment loadout page to the building interface that you are basically scrolling through a bunch of nicely decorated menus. It's pretty intuitive after a while, but I did find it to be a bit annoying that because there's a lot to remember, you do have your head buried in a bunch of menus most of the time. The main issue is that it takes a while to get used to where things are in these menus. For example, I didn't know how to get to the weapon mods menu for the longest time until I saw this mod slot here and decided to click on it, but I never did figure out how to mod my defense towers, even though the game told me that I could do that. But that's kind of the beauty of playing on normal difficulty. Maybe at higher difficulties you'd be heavily impacted by not modding your towers or engaging in other power systems like that, but for me, on normal, the game was relatively easy and I could just fumble my way around and enjoy the game. The last issue I have with the Riftbreaker is its technical performance. I really only experienced it towards the end of the game, but when you get to harder encounters with hundreds of enemies on the screen and other hordes of enemies around the map, with hundreds of little explosions and damage numbers and all that, the graphics stuttered a lot. None of it was absolutely game breaking, but it was pretty annoying, especially when you're in the heat of a massive endgame battle and lag is slowing everything down and ruining the epicness. But the worst part about this is when the game autosaves. I had my intervals set to autosave every 10 minutes and I honestly don't know why I didn't make that interval longer. It would have solved my problem, but I guess I'm just overly careful with my save states these days. Every time the game autosaves, it freezes for like 5 seconds, and then you can continue with whatever you're doing. It doesn't sound like much, but I promise it became extremely annoying, especially when you're concentrating on making your base layout, and the sudden freeze makes you misplace one of your buildings, then you have to tear down that building and replace it with another one, and then it happens again, and eventually you're just like, fuck it, and leave it there, and then you come back after you finish a mission and realize that your base is terribly misaligned because of a couple misplaced buildings. Again, not game breaking, just annoying. Overall, the Riftbreaker is a pretty simple game. It's small and the campaign doesn't take too long to complete. There's a secondary mode called Survival where you just build a base to survive as long as possible, but I decided that my goal after the campaign would be a bit different. I think the best part about the Riftbreaker is how free you are to build your base any way you want, equip your character however you like, and face the challenges that the game has to offer. It's that freedom that makes the game so much fun, and I think that's something that a lot of games miss out on these days. The Riftbreaker was just fun. It didn't have any overarching story or complicated mechanics, it was just fun. And after the campaign was over and I had all the strongest buildings and weapons at my disposal, there was only one thing I wanted to do: expansion. After the campaign is over, you can come back and play your save file right before you started the final mission. So I came back and decided that it was my solemn duty to destroy all nature and expand my metal borders to force my influence on any living creature that dared oppose me. And as of making this video, I got pretty far. After playing the game for so long, you kind of get into the groove of how to build successful bases. You build up your energy sources and make sure you store a ton of it. You build an insane amount of defense towers so you can just watch the fireworks instead of getting involved in battles. And you upgrade and power up your resource gatherers so you can keep doing this without any resource constraints. So I built little colonies everywhere and then connected them all to the same giant power grid. And now I have a functioning city. And best of all, I put my metal floors everywhere so there are no pesky trees or grasses or flowers where I don't want them, just in my little cultivator parks. Here I can take leisurely strolls and briefly think of a time when humans were more in tune with nature before heading back and destroying large areas of the land with my fists. I did run into a problem though. After conquering and colonizing so much of the land, I think I may have driven away any opposition because the attacks stopped coming. Not even the randomly generated combat encounters, everything was peaceful. So I stopped playing and made this video instead. All jokes aside, this game is a hell of a lot of fun. I don't think it's going to win any awards, and it's not the most complex game, but it's fun. And when's the last time you played a game to just have fun and not think too much about it? So I strongly recommend trying out the Riftbreaker. There's a demo you can download and the game itself is $30, and there's some DLC that just came out. I didn't try the DLC, but I hear pretty good things about it. And remember, I'm not sponsored, but most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it and subscribe for more casual reviews. I hope you enjoyed colonization and destroying the ecosystems of indigenous cultures. Just kidding, don't do that, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.